Here are 3 films about characters pulled into a world they didn't choose and forced to learn how to survive it. Torment from 1986 is a horror thriller about a middle-aged man who goes on a killing spree after being spurned on a date by a younger woman. He then targets the family of the police detective who is after him, leading to most of the movie taking place in one house where the detective's mother lives. There are more details to this story, but I would leave them to the viewer to be surprised. I will just say this is kind of a gritty 80s thriller that has been largely forgotten. At the time of this recording, it only has triple-digit views on Letterboxd, but there is a Blu-ray of it and it is available on YouTube currently. I enjoyed this film despite it not being extremely violent and not having any nudity or anything flashy like that, but I enjoyed the performances, the well-executed feeling of suspense, and the experimental and noisy musical score. The cast and crew of this movie are largely unknown to this day, with the exception of Brenner, whose presence leads to this movie sometimes being referred to as hagsploitation. But however you classify it, Torment is a decent hidden gem of an 80s thriller. The Bloody Lady from 1981 is a Czechoslovakian animated film that is a fantasy interpretation of the story of Elizabeth Bathory, one of the most notorious serial killers in all of human history. If that premise doesn't get its hooks in you, I'm not sure what will. I found this movie while browsing Canopy and was captivated by the thumbnail, and threw it on one busy morning due to the short runtime. I didn't realize what a treat I was in for because this movie is excellent. Now, I'm not a historian, I don't know much about the story of Elizabeth Bathory, but I can tell you, due to this movie being mostly a fantasy, that it does take extreme liberties with the real-life source material. The movie starts with Our Lady holding court over her subjects, which include animals and men trying to impress her. Eventually, she becomes bored with the men and, understandably, wants to spend more time in the woods with her animal friends. She gets caught in a cold rainstorm and is cared for by a kind woodsman who she ends up literally giving her heart to, and this begins her descent into darkness. Like I said, I went into this one pretty blind, not knowing what to expect, and I was blown away by the visual presentation as well as the music, which is absolutely beautiful. I will say here, in case it's not abundantly clear, that although this does have some fantastical elements, and especially the Snow White-esque character portrayal in the beginning of the movie, this film is not for children. It depicts serious violence and disturbing imagery. But for me, it was just a really cool movie. Although I watched this on Canopy, I did order the Blu-ray, which features other works from director Viktor Kubal, and I am looking forward to checking that out when it gets here. Swing Girls from 2004 is a Japanese film about a class of misfits who are doing summer school, accidentally poisoning the brass band and having to take their place. This movie has been on my radar for a while. It tends to go hand in hand with Linda, 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 a movie that I adored and have covered in a previous episode. I had very high expectations for this movie, and it's rare when this happens, but every one of my expectations was met, because this is hands down one of the best movies I've ever seen in my life. It's rare to see a movie where all of the pieces come together and even smaller characters have significance. With a cast this big, that is amazing to pull off, but everything clicks. All the calls back to earlier in the movie make complete and total sense. Everything is wrapped up nicely at the end. But most importantly, this is just a happy, feel-good movie that will fill you with joy. I was either laughing or crying through the whole thing, simply because of how this movie filled my heart with happiness through the entire runtime, which I was hoping would never end. How often do you watch a movie that you wish wouldn't end? This movie feels very authentic from the musical standpoint, because all of that stuff is true to real life, to the extent that the young actresses in this movie were trained how to actually play the instruments, and that's them playing in the movie. This is one of those movies that just gets a universal recommendation, not just from me, but from most people who have seen it. It is perfect in every way. And it is a great companion to Linda, Linda, Linda. They are two very similar movies that tell two different stories in different ways. But I can see why they go together in the zeitgeist. And now I can see why Swing Girls is such a well-beloved movie. And although it's not particularly easy to find, I highly suggest you seek it out in any way you can. And that's going to do it for this episode. If you like these short movie reviews I do, I have a whole playlist of them on my channel. Thank you for watching to the end, and I'll see you on the next one.